Okay, so today we are joined by Mr. Ollie Phillips. How are you, Ollie?
Mate, I am wonderful. It's just very nice to see my good friend, Mr. Lerner. I haven't seen him for a little while, so awesome to be here and delighted to be part of the show.
It's been a while, given the COVID and things like this. It hasn't been over the previous year. It was a little bit challenged to get any face-to-face meetings with anyone, wasn't it?
Yeah, mate. Yeah. Well, although I'm delighted that some of those, because some of the sessions you used to put me through were brutal. So the fact that I can now avoid those and just do them on through a virtual channel just gives me the opportunity of hiding if I need to. But
just a very brief bit of context there, just for those who are listening. We did some work years ago when you were still playing rugby, and we did some training and etc. And that was part of how we met.
Yeah, it was.
And things have progressed in both our lives, right? And today is really about talking about where that's taken you, where your career's taken you, where that mindset of yours has came from, and developing that.
Well, I mean, on that, I think opportunities in life come from meeting great people, like-minded people with similar values, similar principles, similar focus points in life. And, I guess the medium for you and I at that point in time when we met, wow, it would be over 10 years ago now, mate, was through one of the most incredible human beings on the planet, Kevin Lidlow, who is a physiotherapist, but he's a hell of a lot more than that. And he's almost like a miracle man. And, during your time at the Third Space Medical Center, I just had a knee operation, was sort of trying to come back. We'd met, and I sort of really loved the stuff that you were doing, the enthusiasm that you had, if you like, the focus that you applied onto certain things, and how you really loved understanding the process and the mechanics, not only behind training, but also your nutrition and your sleep and everything. And we started working together. And to be honest, I have never done sessions like it to this date. Honestly, they are tough, obviously really, really tough, but and I always remember they pushed me physically to my absolute optimum. And at the end of it resulted in me being a much bigger, faster, stronger athlete. I came back stronger than I had originally left. And that's what I loved about it. And, I followed you from Third Space to when you went to Up as well. And yeah, it's just been a great experience, a great friendship that we've built. And as I say, it came through like-minded, incredible, inspirational people like Mr. Lidlow.
And well, Kevin, we can, I'd love to speak to Kevin. I don't think podcasts are his thing, but he does phenomenal work with athletes across the UK and people who aren't athletes as well. But just really focusing on you and where that kind of mindset and that performance mindset came from. Obviously, you come from a rugby background. Obviously, there's history before that. We'd like to sort of delve into that. You studied at Durham University. You then went ahead and did an MBA at Cambridge, if I'm right.
Correct.
And then from that, you wore the Blues. You got the varsity shirt, and for again the non-rugby people, that's quite an accolade to actually pull on that shirt and play rugby for the Cambridge versus Oxford game, right?
Yeah, the varsity match.
And from that developed this quite incredible rugby career that you carved out and played for England and various other bits and pieces. So do you want to just let's go back a little bit, maybe even prior to that? Is that sure. Before you started your studies at Durham, Ollie the kid, Ollie the teenager, Ollie the where is this mindset of yours, and where's this mentality and this drive towards performance all the time? And again, even today, when we talk, you still have that same buzz, you still have that same drive, you still have that mindset, that motivation that you, as far as I remember, you always had. And then prior to that, obviously before we knew each other, I didn't know what existed. And is this something that's been there your entire life?
I think, I mean, it's a great question. I love drilling into these sort of mindset questions. I think, to be honest with you, my mindset has evolved over time and how I sort of approach things. And I would say what I was as a professional athlete was a very competitive beast. Where did that come from? So if you take it back to when I was a young lad, I'd played rugby since I was the age of 4. I'd loved it. I'd loved the sort of every Saturday or Sunday, what it was, going down to my local mini rugby club, playing for Hove, and then my school, which was St Christopher's, and then Brighton College. I love being around people and being in this sort of social environment, and then having this opportunity to have this shared experience with people that was competitive. So I really enjoyed that. I think that was then fueled by life events. So my mum and dad broke up, pretty ugly divorce when I was sort of 10, 11, right in your proper formative years. And I think that had a really probably adverse effect on me at the time, but you just don't realize it, right? But I think what happened in that process was, I didn't understand what was going on. I, like most kids and young kids, really looked up to my dad, wanted my dad's sort of respect and recognition and reward. And to be honest with you, that just wasn't there. Like, he never really gave a monkeys about sport, or me playing sport, or me even being very good at sport. So this is probably portraying him in a bad light, but he never came to watch any of my games, really. He never really took any interest, never asked how I played, never congratulated me of when I got into like England under 16s, England under 18s. And so I think now, reflecting back on it, well, and not reflect, I've done some proper, whatever you want to call it, like therapy around it, counselling around it as well. That was a intrinsic driver, right? That this need to seek recognition or prove him wrong or whatever else like that. I think that was a definitive drive. And every time that I thought he's going to be proud of this, I've just got into England squad, or I've just scored the winning try, or in the Daily Mail quarter final, or whatever it might be, every time I go, and it would like, I remember, I'd say, Dad, I want to go play for Harlequins, or they've offered me a contract when I was 17. And he's like, look, son, when are you going to get a proper job? That was the sort of like response, right? So that would always be the driver of like, okay, I've got to go one better. I've got to go one better. Prove him wrong. Almost like prove him wrong. What the fuck does he know? I'm going to prove him, and prove him wrong that I can make a career of this, that I am good enough, etc., etc. So I think right up until then, until I was 18, and then a big like moment, disaster happened, was I'd been pretty good educationally all the way through. I'd nailed my GCSEs. I can't remember what I got, but I got 2 A stars and 6 A's, straight A's at GCSE.
Yeah.
And I was I was predicted 2 A's and a B for my A levels. I was studying economics, geography, and history, I think. And I was meant to go to the London School of Economics to study economics with economic history. I mean, this is how boring I was going to become in life, right? And then I just got distracted by things like, well, probably all the physical and outdoor side. So CCF, I'd got voted as like cadet of the country. I was captain for our school. I was in the England under 18 squad at rugby. My school had got girls, so first time I met women and stuff as like a 17, 18-year-old lad. So all these distractions were happening in my life, and I ended up coming out with BBD. And I remember that day being like, my God, this is not a great day. It made even worse by the fact, obviously, I had this personal pressure on my back, on my shoulders of my old man, who I was like, I'm proving him wrong. And look, I'm killing it on all the sporting front, and I'm killing it on the academic front. And this is the first sort of slip up. So I was like, oh, fuck, I've ballsed this one up here. So London School of Economics said, look, we'd really love to have you, but, we can't. And I also knew in my gut, LSE were in the Strand, and I was also going to sign a contract for Harlequins, who were at that point based in Aldershot.
Yeah.
So I was sort of reflecting, thinking, this ain't going to work, right? I'm only going to go one way. It's going to be Aldershot. It's not going to be the Strand. So I probably neglect that as well, having looked at recent form. And luckily, Durham said, look, we'd still like to invite you here. They were my third choice, I think, at the time. And I was going up to study a BA in business. So I literally, on the spur of the moment, I hadn't even been to Durham to see the place. I said, you know what, this is what I need. I need to remove myself from, this pressure, remove myself from distraction of like maybe sport and education or whatever, go to a red brick university that's a really good place, and rewrite the wrongs for my A-level stuff. And then I got there, and it was the best decision ever made in my life. 3 years.
Hell of a university, Durham, right?
Yeah, great university, but it was more the sort of maturity element of it. I got away from the pressures of, my old man and this constant sort of, it didn't, don't get me wrong, it didn't go away, this need to sort of prove him wrong and get validation, whatever. But but it definitely changed my whole approach of, and I grew up. I learned how to, fend for myself, cook for myself, clean for myself, live in my own environment. Whereas before, so I was living at home. So that was a massive stage, and also, a big, if you like, life commitment. I'd kind of almost said, you know what, rugby now has to come second, because as a statement, because I'm going to go and finish this. I got there.
Do you think that was brought about by that whole get a proper job scenario? Do you think that was is that part of it?
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
Because I always remember the same conversation, but again, this was when, I became a trainer, and really at the time, my old man probably had a point. He probably had a point in that it wasn't a terribly well paid job, and I don't know whether he knew that or not. But again, a sporting career probably at that time for you was probably the only people getting paid a really good wage were in American sport, or probably in soccer, right, or in football, right?
Yeah. I mean, this was in, what year was this? 2001. This was, so the game had gone professional. It was sort of, but it was still in its infancy. 10 years in or whatever else. But I think to your point, my dad probably had a point from a financial perspective, definitely in terms of the financial security, long-term planning, everything else like that, which I get. But I also just thought he was ignorant to just living my life. Like, you're here for a good time, not for a long time. There's an opportunity here to go and do something that the minority in the world are fortunate enough to be able to do from a talent perspective or injury perspective, whatever it is, and that is to go and be a professional rugby player and potentially represent your country, right? I mean,
yeah.
Some of my favorite memories growing up as a kid were going to Twickenham with my dad to watch like England, Scotland, right, and being like singing the national anthem and looking at all the England rugby players and being like, what an honor, what an accolade.
15 to 20 guys down there warming up, and thousands and thousands of people around them, applauding them, right?
Yeah. And my era as like a very young adolescent, 6 to 10 or whatever, that was Rob Andrew, Will Carling, Rory Underwood, these iconic players
Dooley,
for
Johnson.
England. Yeah. So my dad. So anyway, I remember thinking, I don't understand this, Dad. I don't understand why you've got this. Why you're so anti this whole process. But to your point of where did that mindset come from? That was what was. No, I didn't realize this at the time, right? But now I do. That was what was driving me. So my drivers have always been great, and it's built up a competitive spirit in me. But if you like, probably my drivers at the beginning were not necessarily, I don't know if it's the right word, but the right drivers. I was doing it always to try and prove somebody wrong and to try and validate my own decisions, if that makes sense, with my old man, rather than this is really important to me.
It's actually a quote in one of my books. Well, one of my books, the book I wrote, one of the quotes is actually about proving people wrong, because that was a key driver in my life. And again, this isn't about me, but I think there's so many people you talk to who have these moments in their life which you look back on, and again, you said about, did you actually seek therapy about this? And
afterwards, because once, so basically, to fast forward my rugby playing career, rugby became my self-validation toolkit, if you like, and actually the framework of rugby is probably not productive for somebody like me, because it's geared towards every Saturday you get the nod from somebody that gives you recognition and approval in a coach that says you're picked or you're not picked, right?
Yeah.
So I was fueled the whole time, like every week, getting this hit of like, he loves me, I'm starting, and like and then I walk out and 80,000 people.
And when you're on the up, that's brilliant, right? But when you're, where they don't give you the nod.
Then it's like, oh my God, why? And you start all this desperate search for, need for recognition, right?
Yep.
And then you couple that with, when you do get the nod, you run out in front of 10,000 people for your home crowd. If you then get the nod for England, it's another person validation, giving you recognition. You run out in front of 80,000 people, they all give you validation and recognition. So it's this, it just fuels it. It's like a drug, right? It's just this never-ending drug. And then when it stopped, when rugby got taken away or ended, because I got injured and my career ended either way, whenever, irrespective of whether I got injured or not, that whole mechanism for self-validation, self-worth, recognition stopped dead.
Gone, right.
And that's when, but if you like, but my behavior didn't change, my needs didn't change. And I wasn't somebody that, I'll be totally candid on the show. I wasn't somebody that liked drink or drugs, so they weren't my vices, right?
No, that's right.
They weren't going to be my route, so I wasn't interested in them, didn't like it, no interest, never tried it. I've drunk, a bit in my life, but not even faced around that. So my vice was what I could get emotional security and recognition and love and adoration, and that was women. Right? So I couldn't just have one girlfriend. I needed like 5.
Yeah.
Because and I would go, literally, it was almost like a cut and paste method for going on a date or whatever else. And I couldn't just go on like a normal date and go for a drink or have a cup of tea and just say hello. I'd need to be like, I'd have to go one better. So on the second date, I'd take them to Paris or something ridiculous like that, because I needed to go one next level.
It's like an almost like an extreme drive, right? You want to,
of course, yeah,
you want
to
to
get
go
the
all
bigger
out.
hit, to give this bigger hit of adoration and love and affection. And it was a disaster case for me, because it was eventually, obviously I couldn't see it at the time, but now 5 years on or whatever, I recognize it was a recipe for disaster, because all that was going to happen were people were going to really, I and they were going to fall in love with each other, but I was going to fall in love with the emotion, not the person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
as a result of that, when I was like, oh, you know what, I need more from somewhere, I'd go somewhere else to get it, and then that would end in disaster, right? I mean, that's not, if you fall in love with people and then you're saying, yeah, I'm in love with you, but I'm in love with someone else as well, that's not a great recipe.
Yeah.
And I just realized I'd been with someone for about 2 years. We'd unfortunately she'd got pregnant. We'd lost a baby on the day of our 12-week scan. And I just remember me needing this need. So when she was going through this turmoil for the next 6 months, I was like needing this need. And so I hadn't physically done anything, but emotionally I'd re-engaged with a ex-girlfriend who was like saying like, you're amazing and all this sort of stuff, just feeding me with crap, basically, that made me feel great. And I was totally ignorant to the way it would make my girlfriend at the time feel. And I remember it all culminated in her being outside my front door, smashing on my front door at 3 a.m. in my dressing gown, me being on the other side of the door, pretending I wasn't in the house, sat literally with my back to the door as she was on the outside of it, and just thinking, I need to sort this out. Like, there's something wrong.
So at that point, so obviously these are things that there's going to be so many people I think relate to. Otherwise, maybe my head's in a different bubble, but I can relate to so many things that you're talking about there, and I'm sure so many of our listeners can also do that. And obviously, you're very open, very candid about it, which is phenomenal, because I think part of that struggle is not being open, not being candid about it, not admitting that there's a problem there, right? So at what point here have you actually gone and talked to someone about this? Because clearly it looks like this is the route it's going, right? You're at the point where you've recognized, I've actually got a problem here.
Of course, I'd looked at my history, if you like, of behaviour that had happened, and I'd always gone through I'm sure some people have done it as well. It was always just not quite right, or they just weren't for me, or they were mental. Like, it was always their responsibility, or circumstances just didn't make it. If only we were in this place, or if only. And I realized that I was the architect of my own. I painted my own picture here, and I was basically setting myself up to fail every single time, because my whole raison d'etre and reason for being, whatever else, was fueled by the wrong things. It was being fueled by this constant need for adoration and affection, and I was, and this one moment, if you like, where she was crying outside the front door, made me suddenly think, I'm just hurting people here, right? I'm just hurting people in this process, and I'm actually hurting myself as well at the same time, because this is destroying me inside, and it's actually only adding fuel to the fire, because now I've got someone on the other side of this door that hates me, and that is the antithesis of what I want.
Of course, right? It's
I need people to love me.
Of what you're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, I need people to love me. I need them to feel like affection, adoration. This person, so I would then invest tons and tons of time in just trying to make them like me again, even though there's all this backstory and water under the bridge that was, irrelevant. So I knew at that point there's something, the wiring isn't right here, and I need to like ascertain what it is. And I guess I was fortunate in that I just left rugby. I was 3 years out or 2 years out from playing. So there was definitely an element, it was a huge element of that, of my support structure, my crux wasn't there anymore. But there was a thing called the Players Union with the RPA that I had reached out to and sort of said, look guys, I think I'm struggling here, but I don't know. I don't quite know what it is.
And you came from a sport that's very masculine, and probably a generation, right, where it was like, you know, men don't talk about their problems, men don't admit they've got problems, men just get on with it.
Of course,
they graft, they do their thing, and obviously your relationship with your dad probably made that a million times worse, right?
Yeah,
and then
100%.
So you've reached out to players because this is something that I know and you know happens to a lot of ex-professional athletes. I mean, this is something that, you know, one of your colleagues, James, a friend of both of ours, he actually mentioned on one of his podcasts, you know, not so long ago, was about the fact that he's come out of rugby and then all of a sudden it's like, I'm lost. I'm completely lost. I don't know what to do. All this thing that I was focusing towards rugby and was getting that adoration, which you're talking about, all of a sudden now I have to redirect it somewhere else, which is what you've done, right? Yeah, so you've accomplished what you needed to do, but then you've realized that it's really negative. So you've reached out to Players Association, right? Who I guess did they have people in place that could help with these kind of things? This transition from professional sport to life, right?
Yeah. So this was the dawn of it, if you like, in its infancy. So I reached out to them, and they just set up a link with a company called Cognacity, and they were wanting to do we were talking around what I was going through, basically what I was feeling, and it snowballed into something where that we launched this program called Lift the Weight, which is basically about lifting the lid on mental health, transition from sport, the struggles that players were getting. And to be honest with you, I think in the end there was 8 players that did it, of which I was one. That we all sort of took part in this campaign called Lift the Weight campaign, which was about promoting to other players that it's okay not to be okay, right? And come forward and let's talk about it. And we did not anticipate. It was probably the one mistake that we made, was that from an infrastructure perspective, if you like, we just didn't anticipate the number of people that would come forward, like literally hundreds of players that came out.
And now you look at it and do you think, that was definitely going to happen?
Yeah. Now I look back at it and, you know, there's still so much to do, right? But I'm so proud of the other 7 guys that were part of that process, and that we took it, you know, to where we've taken it. And I think now Lift the Weight is in its 3rd or 4th iteration of a campaign. And if you like, I mean, there's still so far to go, but the conversation of mental health and your own personal well-being and, you know, transition from sport is very much at the forefront, and players are prepared to talk about it. And as you say, you've got people like, you know, Has talking about it on their podcast, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, which is what we need, because the biggest cause of death in males between the ages of 40 and 50, 80% is from male suicide, right? 80%. That's a nuts figure, right? I think you get to that point in life, in 40, where you've been striving for something all your life. You've either achieved it or you've not achieved it, but one way or the other, I think at between 40 and 50, you get this sort of like reassessment. You know, I'm kind of like the halfway point in my life. Have I done what I've achieved? What's been my purpose? What's been this? And you're either disappointed with it, or there's things you wanted to do, or you feel like you're never going to fulfill your ambition, or whatever it is, right? But that triggers these people to say, you know what, it's better if I'm just not around. And that's tragic, right? That is tragic. That's just such a waste of human life. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, I don't know, because I have a crystal ball, but if I had carried on the way I was carrying on, that could have been me. And I don't mean that like in a cry for help to anybody, because it's not going to be me. But my mental state and the transition period that I went, it took me about 2 years to go through that sort of mental journey. There were times as a 30, whatever I was at the time, 32-year-old, 33-year-old, 32, 33. Like I had those dark thoughts of like, you know what, it's better if I this would be easier if I just don't hang around. If I
Yeah.
and I don't, I'm being honest, like, I don't think I truly believed I would do it, but it was like this weird out of body experience of like, that isn't you, Ollie. Like, that's not who you are. But why the hell are you feeling like this? Like, this is not. Yeah, but that was part of the process. So I know we're talking very openly, right? But I would say to people, when you go through this process, have the courage and the conviction just to stick with it, because it's just like everything, right? It gets harder before it gets better, and it does get better, but it's a bit like training, right? When you're pretty fat and unfit and everything else like that, there are those dark, horrific moments at the beginning where you don't think it's getting any better and your body's killing you and you feel horrific. And then suddenly you go on the upward curve and you're like, wow, I look better naked. I feel stronger. I feel healthier. I feel fitter, blah, blah, blah. That process is exactly the same thing with your own mental health. And it definitely took me a bit of time to readjust and reassess around that.
That's mad. And again, it's that loss of purpose, right?
Yeah.
Is that previously it was a one-way channel, right? Is I assume when you were playing rugby, it was just adoration. You know, you walk out the ground or whatever it might be. Everybody's asking for autographs and pictures and blah blah blah. And there's all these kids looking up to you and all these, even adults looking up to you, right? And then all of a sudden, there is none of that anymore.
Yeah. It's a drug, right?
There's no.
It's total addiction. I love this, and particularly when your whole fixation is around recognition, reward, adoration. Like,
it's almost it's akin to like the social media thing that the new generation is kind of, millennials are struggling with now, because social media has the same impact, right? Is that you've got potential of thousands and thousands of people adoring you, who you may never even, it's similar, right? You run out and Twickenham, you're not looking people in the face and recognizing people or anything like that. It's just these thousands of people that adore what you do and what you're about. And social media kind of provides that same channel, right, for people.
Exactly, yeah. Because I mean, I wish, one regret I have is, I wish it was more about the people than about the emotion, if that makes sense for me. Because totally. Those 80,000 people, whatever, I didn't know, hardly any of them, and I wish I'd
every single one of them knew you, right?
Yeah, and I wish I'd taken more interest in that rather than actually being interested in what was basically sort of fairly self-interested, selfish existence, which is like, just feed me, give me this fixation of drug. You think I'm brilliant? Yeah, I'll sign this. I'll take a photo with your kid or whatever. Whereas, so I think that, that was it. And then to add to your point, I was also really, really fucking good at my job, right?
Yeah.
I knew my onions in terms of, I knew what it meant to be a great rugby player. I knew how to be one of the fittest players in the world, let alone the squad. I mean, I got voted at one point as the best player in the world.
Yeah. Just to add weight to that, what, in 2009 you were the Sevens Rugby Player of the Sevens World Rugby Player of the Year. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then 2011
European one,
Player of the Year.
Yeah.
Were you at Stade Francais there?
Yeah. So winning these accolades in terms of like, I mean, whether I was or wasn't, but you're the best in your field, or at least you're the top 1% in your field, right? Of expertise. And equally, you can call bullshit on other people, right? So I wasn't you knew your industry. So I mean, I wasn't a prop or a second row, right? But I could hazard a guess when it wasn't going very well, or when they weren't pulling their weight and all the rest of it. So you became an expert in your field and a specialist in your specific role and function. And that obviously boosts your ego and everything else even more. Then when it all stops and you can't do that anymore, and they're like, right, I went to work for PwC, right? So I walk into PwC, I'm like, right, what am I? And they're like, you got so many transferable skills. PwC is an area of specialism in like tax or consulting or assurance. I'm like, what the fuck do I know about tax? And equally, like, why am I interested in tax? And then you are then surrounded by people that have done 12 to 14 years in this industry, just like you've been doing in rugby. They are well down the curve. So they know miles more than you. They're much more specialist than you. They are the experts now. And all the transferable skills that you've got are soft skills. They're like being a good bloke and managing people. But you're used to being the expert. You're used to being like, give me a ball and I'll hit that target 20 times off my left and my right. And no one else can do that kind of thing. Now, like, the only transferable skills I look at is like, well, I could run up and down the stairs faster than anyone in the building.
So they're telling you at this point that you've got transferable skills, and you're kind of in doubt about this, right? You're going,
you're down. So
what you want about these transferable skills? I don't get it. So ultimately, what was that transferable skill? I mean, I kind of know what the answer is here, because I know you, and I know that if I was a business owner, I'd be like, right, Ollie's my man, irrespective of whether he lacks some of the rudimental
Technical
skills that
knowledge,
you maybe require, right? So, and again, you've just been talking about it and kind of pinpointing why you've got these transferable skills. So what were they? So I'm assuming you figured it out, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a constantly evolutionary process, right? To be honest, because it's that classic imposter syndrome that people talk around, which is you never feel like you are safe or secure in your own skin, if that makes sense. You always feel like you're one step behind everybody else. And at the beginning, I think that made me feel totally uneasy and uncomfortable, because I was used to being the expert in my own skin, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas now I've probably got a recognition and appreciation of this ability to constantly just keep learning and evolving and discovering new things and exploring, the world, if that makes sense. And my my transferable skills were or are around the ability to corral and bring a group together to quickly process and understand a problem, listen, if you like, to people and to what their stresses and strains are, and then try and make sure that you corral and bring the right people into the mixer that can help solve those problems. So if you like, leading, managing, and establishing good, clear conversations that have got clarity around them with clear outcomes and deliverables, like that's probably that is my skill set, right? But it took me a long time to recognize, and not only that, but appreciate that. I used to look at that as like, that's not skill. That's not skill.
Just something that you have, and that's it, right?
Yeah. It's just like,
it's not. This isn't something I've developed. It's just something that's there, and it's And you almost assume everybody else has got it. And again, if you've been surrounded by professional sports people your entire life, right? Is that the vast majority of them have that mindset? They have that mentality. They have that. And again, they're all coming out of professional sport in the same kind of boat you are. And you were saying there that you had, one of our mantras as a business is, we talk about leading people. We talk about intent. We talk about discipline. We talk about all those different things. And what you've got there, and just to add a bit of context for those listening, is that you were Sevens captain.
Yeah.
You were England Sevens captain, right? Which meant that you had leadership skills. And then you've came out of all of this. And do you think that without those leadership skills, you wouldn't have been able to actually recognize your own problems and your own challenges? Or do you think that was something that just inevitably had to happen?
Yeah, I probably think more the latter, if I'm like really honest. The reason why I say this is I think my role as a leader, as a captain for England, was beneficial, but it probably wasn't better. Like, because if you like, I was leading in a way that I thought was leadership, if this makes sense. So I was leading a group of people that were similar age, similar sex, same priorities, and to be honest, were of a similar skill set to me, right? So it was pretty vanilla, what I needed to do. And I thought that great leadership was also based on the fact that I was one of the best players, or the best player, right? My obsession was like, I need to be the best in my field, et cetera, et cetera. So my leadership style was more centered around me performing and being the best I can be, and delivering on the field from an actual like specific skill set perspective, and then shouting and screaming at everybody pre and post to make sure that we were up emotionally.
But I think that's notoriously something in rugby. And again, I've got a background in rugby. I played rugby since I was 7 years old, I think it was.
Yeah.
And there's always this thing where I think in schoolboy rugby, typically it's the best player becomes the captain, right? And then as you get into senior rugby, all of a sudden it isn't always the best player. It's often, and this has happened in England's case, right? It definitely isn't the flair player, the biggest, the greatest player on the field necessarily. And again, that obviously requires a lot of context, because people have different jobs, right? People would never perceive a prop's the best player because their job's fairly boring and monotonous, and there's not much flair and pizzazz about it. But ultimately, it then gets into senior rugby, and all of a sudden, it's not always the best player, right? So you must have had, so for England to turn around to you and go, Ollie, we want you to be the captain, there must have been more than just, he's the best player, let's pick him.
Well, yes, but I mean, but look at professional sport, right? You can't not be one of, you can't not be either the best player in your position, or at least in the top 2 or 3 in your position, right? And be captain, right? You have to be in that stratosphere, because you can't go onto the field with like an awesome leader but a pathetic rugby player, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
So I don't know, Dylan Hartley, when he played, like, he got loads of flack because, you know, he wasn't necessarily the number one choice at hooker, but he was arguably the best leader that England had. But you have to caveat that of, he still was like number 2 or number 3 of the best players in the whole of England. So,
and this occurred in cricket as well, didn't it? Where there was uproar. I can't remember who it was, but they picked someone as captain who you know was like batting way down the order, didn't really bowl, didn't really do a lot, was essentially a glorified fielder, you know, but had this huge leadership skill. And I remember this, you know, it was England in the probably mid 2000s, I think, and I can't remember who it was exactly, but there was this whole uproar about, we've picked him because we need a leader.
Yeah,
and if that leader doesn't exist, and I remember a couple of times in rugby, it might have been Wilkinson, where they made him captain, then all of a sudden his mindset switched and he couldn't actually play in the manner that he used to play in, because he was so focused on trying to be captain, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously elements of certain players that can't do it and can do it, but I think my point is more around, in order to even hold your hand up for the captain's role, or even to be considered in terms of your ability and competence, you need to be one of the best players, if not, you know, the best player in your role, in order to be in that shop window. Whereas if you contrast that to, you know, the big bad world now, you can be chief exec of a business. I don't know, you could be chief exec of BT but have no experience in telecoms. I mean, it helps, right? Yeah. But you can have had a whole experience of being chief exec of an oil and gas business, I'm just making this up, and then come across into a totally different industry sector and still be in the shop window, because the skill sets that are required there are the ability to mobilize a team, manage people, build a strategy, etc., etc. It's not necessarily the skill itself, if that makes sense, which in this instance is playing rugby. So, you know, they don't need to be an expert at, you know, wiring telephones or whatever else in order to be chief exec of BT, is my point. So that for me was probably the hardest thing to get my head around coming out of professional sport, which was, in order for me to excel in this environment, I don't actually need to be the best in class at my skill set, if that makes sense. Like, as in, I don't know. So PwC traditionally are accountants or whatever else. In order for me to excel and be the best in PwC, I don't need to be the best accountant, right? Is what I'm saying, right? I can lead and manage an incredible group of people and not necessarily know anything or that much about the subject matter, as long as, if you like, my super strengths are then complemented by somebody else's super strength in the areas that I'm not so strong at. And then that's what the composition of a great team is, right? Everybody has got a super strength. The amalgamation of all of that creates this incredible power that then goes forward. Whereas if I tried to be everything to everyone, it would all go Pete Tong. I'd be a great leader, but I'd be pathetic at writing someone's tax return. Right? So, you know, so
can you write tax returns now?
No. No.
So they've honed in on this mindset, on this skill set that you've got, and gone, look, we want to offer you a position based around that. So just so we get a hold of timelines here, because there's a whole load of other stuff that I know you've done in your life and you've done along the way, and I just want to get a grasp of the timelines, and so our listeners can understand what's going on here. So you've addressed these issues that you've clearly acknowledged that you've got, and at that point you've sought help through the lift the weight scheme. They've helped you out. They've looked into the background, the history of it, and I guess a lot of that stuff from your childhood got dredged up, and they brought that to the forefront and said, actually, this is your rationale. And you've gone, oh, yeah. And I totally relate to this, because this is the thing that happened to me. You know, I was in my mid-30s and I was like, hold on, whoa, something's going wrong here. Yeah. And I actually went and I talked to someone about it, and it all traced back to things that had happened in my childhood. And it
shape who you are and your drivers and everything else.
Yeah, so similar to kind of what you're talking about. And, you know, we'll talk about this another time. But at this point, you worked as a charity ambassador.
Yeah, yeah.
At what point has that came into the fray? Because obviously that now that kind of makes sense in a sort of non. How do I phrase this? It's not, because again, that's an adoration thing, right? Is that if you're doing something for other people, it becomes a recognition and adoration, and you're doing something for other people. Again, it's very similar to what you were doing as a rugby player, right? You're doing all this stuff really as a spectator. I'm sure that the drive wouldn't have quite been there if there wasn't hundreds of thousands of people around watching, right?
Of course, yeah.
So you become a charity ambassador. At what point was this happening? Was this post rugby? Was this post you acknowledging this?
So it happened probably during, right? Because I think that that progress, like when I was a young kid, when I was a young kid up to like, I don't know, 10 to 14, 15 or whatever it was, my motive, my drivers were probably actually, I just love being around people and I love playing the game, and and then it evolved, and I suddenly all these things that were missing in my life because my dad left and we had an ugly divorce and whatever else, we had a sort of unsettled home. Suddenly all these other things started to become a bit of a fixation and driving, and just like everything, it becomes a habit. Habit breeds more perpetuity, and by the time I got to like 20, I'd had 10 years of this seeking adoration and fixation on support and everything else like that. It then became a drug, and I didn't know anything about it. And you're right. I then, in the early stages of my rugby career, decided to be a charity ambassador for a couple of charities, and turn up and open a few shops and whatever else like that. As an England Rugby captain, whatever else.
Yep.
And now reflecting on it, you're probably there's definitely a philanthropic side to me, but I would say those drivers are also driven by, this is more recognition, this is more praise, this is more sort of putting me in the the shop window or whatever else. And then when I retired, I went to a Sevens World Cup, got injured. I was 29, and at that point they told me, look, we don't know what's the matter with you, it's all over. And that, for me, particularly as, let's call myself like an addict to this this outcome that was coming from this game of rugby. At that time, I wasn't cognizant of this, but that was a hammer blow. That was a disaster. I was like, this is all I've known all my life. This is all I'm good at. This is how I get my self-validation in life. This is how I get my recognition. This is how I get my purpose and feel on all my self-worth. And now all of this has just gone. Literally I walked off the field. Or I didn't walk off the field. They carried me off the field. They said I'd severed the nerve in my calf. And within 3 hours, they said, we don't know what's the matter. You're going to have to retire. They pulled my 3-year contract out.
And they actually told you that. They said you were going to have to retire 3 hours after an injury.
3 hours after injury, yeah.
Wow.
3 hours. I mean, I'd had a few problems with my calf building up to this, so we'd sort of been on and off, on and off, on and off.
No, I recall that.
But this was the one where they went, sorry. They basically gave up, right? They basically said, we're out of ideas. We give up. There's nothing else that we think we can do. So actually, you just retire. And it still annoys me to this day. But that was that was the outcome, right? So they said
horrendous bedside manner, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
was it the physio? Who's it told you this?
Yeah, the doctor and the physio. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what was even more frustrating was that it was we won't get into that, but there was the whole political. I'd been to see Kevin a lot, and Kevin has said, look, you need to do this form of treatment. This is what it is. I know. And the doctor refused to acknowledge that, and and it was mainly because he didn't like Kevin, and as a result of that, he wouldn't listen and wanted to go off down this path, which was ultimately the wrong path. And then we had.
Sorry, mate, lost you there.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Lost you there for a second.
So before the internet kindly disrupted us, I think. So that was a really tough moment for me, right? I was going through this process where you put trust and faith in sort of some of the medical people that are in the infrastructure. There was definitely a difference of opinion, and well, being honest and being blunt, Kevin Lidlow was right. He was right all the way along. And my one disappointment was I didn't have the conviction to say no, like we're doing what Kevin said to the medics within England. And the reason why I didn't was they were the purse strings who were ultimately going to be paying for my care and my treatment. And they wanted to go a certain way. And the result was I had an operation, and that changed the entire layout of my calf. And it was never the same again from that point on. So anyway, I'd come off the field after having done all of this process to try and get back to play.
And this was post-operation, right?
Yeah, this is post-op.
This was after you had the operation. You got back to playing, rehabbed, blah blah blah. But then inevitably, because it hadn't been restructured properly and hadn't been treated properly, you've got this injury that has transpired into them turning around to you and saying, "That's your career over," in literally like a couple of hours, right?
Yeah, I got carried off the field. And then within about an hour, they sort of said, look, we don't know what the hell this is anymore. You know, I think this could be all over. And then 3 hours later, I sat down with Ben Ryan. He said, look, this isn't great. And I think we're going to have to pull your contract that we've put there because we can't contract.
And this is for the Sevens?
This is for the Sevens, yeah. So my plan was to go to the World Cup that year in Moscow, the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow the year after, and then go to the Olympics in Rio in 2016. And at that point, I would have been 32, 33, and I'd hang up my boots. That was the sort of plan.
That's. I mean, for a player of your, position, et cetera, 32 is kind of.
Yeah, that would have been. I would have made it. I would have just made it, but I'd been at the end. I mean, particularly on a sevens field, I'd have been at the end of the line. I mean, I might have gone and played somewhere else, but I'd had this sort of dream moment of like end at the Olympics in Rio. Great way to go out as an Olympian, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
And that was the first year they played rugby, wasn't it? In
however
2016,
long,
wasn't it?
Yeah, since the 1900s or something like that. So anyway, and obviously that was a bit of a curveball of like, well, shit, hold on. Everything I've ever known, all my identity, all my value and purpose, all my drivers, all my recognition, et cetera, is in this game, and now it's gone. And also I didn't think like that at the time, but now looking back, that's exactly what happened. And to your point, which you're asking around the charity pieces originally, which is what we're talking around, that they were, if you like, I think in the short term, they were fueling this need for recognition. So what happened was I'd been doing some stuff for the Alzheimer's Society because I had unfortunately lost my grandma to that about 6 months prior to my leg and me having to retire. And so I'd agreed to do a load of fundraising for them. And I'd then have been approached by this thing called the Clip Around the World race to say, look, we've just done a deal with Downing Street. We need an ambassador to come and
just done a deal with Downing Street. It sounds a bit fishy.
It was, yeah. So the Downing Street had launched an Olympic legacy program called the Great Campaign post London 2012. And the whole premise was that they wanted to encourage foreign direct investment back into the UK by going around saying business is great, sport is great, technology is great, travel is great, everything that's great about Great Britain, come put your money in the UK. And they said, look, we've decided that a good medium for this would be the race. We're going to have our own Great Britain boat, and we would like you to be a great ambassador. So are you up for it? Do you want to go and sail around the world? I was like, what? Like, and
what at this stage did you know about sailing?
Nothing. Zero.
Nothing.
Never been on sailboat in my life. I'd been down to meet the way it come about was in the February. This conversation was happening in the July when I'd got my injury. But in the February, I'd been down to Portsmouth or Gosport where they're based and done a photo because there was a few people that were doing this race for the Alzheimer's Society. So I stood at the end of the boat, looked at them all, gone, you're all nutcases, what you're all doing, blah, 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 blah. Like, well done. Thanks for the Alzheimer's. Feed my need for recognition even more. Be on the front of a few newspapers. Off I left. And I sort of stayed in touch with the founder, a guy called Sir Robert Knox-Johnson, because he was a sort of rugby fan and he'd come to a couple of games and everything else like that. So within 5 weeks of me getting injured, they'd rung me that 2 days later and said, look, do you fancy it, being this ambassador for the Great Campaign? And if you want to do it, I was like, yep, I'll do it. And then I'd gone and done my 3 weeks training, and then I'd hopped on a boat and I'd sailed around the world within 5 weeks, packed up my house and left.
So do you think this was kind of also part of a coping mechanism?
It was don't get me wrong, it was the greatest experience I've ever had in my life, but I reckon it could have been 50 times more if my reasons for doing it were, if I were more in touch with my own personal reasons for doing it. Because I think at that point in time, the reason why I did it was it's going to keep me at the forefront. Like, these people want me. I'm going to be on the front of newspapers.
Yeah, yeah.
What a great adventure. I can go away. I'm still a somebody. I mean, it wasn't what I was thinking about at the time, right? I was confusing these messages in my sort of guts that were making me feel this way with, it's going to be amazing. I've always wanted to sail around the world. Like, I'd never thought about sailing around the world ever in my life. So that's not true, right? But so, it was all these things that would be keeping me current, keeping me at the forefront of people's imagination. I'd still be a somebody, and I had this sort of delusions of grandeur that I could go do a year away from rugby, get away from it, not be around it all, let my leg recover, and then when I come back, I'd still have 2 years to have a crack at getting fit and going to Olympic Games. And wouldn't that be an amazing story? Ex-England Rugby captain, they wrote him off. He went and sailed around the world and came back and achieved Olympic glory. Like, awesome story. And I even believed it myself. I mean, I sold that to the Clipper as well, in terms of, like, that's what I think I can do. So I genuinely, that was my mission. That was my belief. But what I'm saying
that's
is,
an enormous amount of self-belief though, right? So
yeah. But it was fueled, I think it was fueled by the wrong reasons, right? That's what I'm trying to say to you. It was fueled by this desperation to still be a somebody, to still be get the recognition and reward.
Yeah. I mean, this is a debate I've had with other people about the whole, like charity, right? Is that a lot of businesses give to charity because they get a tax break?
Yeah.
Is that inherently wrong?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's no such thing as bad charity, but I think it's just going to be a more rewarding process for the people receiving the money and the people giving the money. If you actually are, this is my point, right? If you actually are interested and take some form of, belief and interest in the thing you're giving to, if it's actually got some meaning to you, you'll get the tax break,
that
whatever.
Meaning not different? It's a bit like rugby, right? Is that I guess there's a lot of guys in rugby who, who play rugby for purely selfish reasons, right? Yeah. It's, I want to do this for me. It's not about the crowd. It's not about the people that are there watching. It's not about anybody else but me. Is that fundamentally the same thing? Is that the same kind of mindset? And ultimately, does it cause any problems? It's an interesting one because, the psyche of all of this always intrigues me as to, the rationale behind why someone is doing something. Is it, is it to alleviate their own mindset, their own self-beliefs, their own, requirements, whatever they may be? I think
it depends. Whatever your goal is, right? That there's nothing wrong with that goal, if that makes sense. Whatever the rationale behind it all is, it's fine. And if it achieves that at the end of it, brilliant. You've achieved what you set out to do, and you'll take your satisfaction from achieving that. But I just think in order to achieve long-term sustainability, happiness, success, it needs to be linked to a deeper purpose, a deeper meaning, because it'll then give you proper fulfillment. Like, if you just do something all the time because it sort of scratches the itch that you've got, it doesn't actually help you ever identify something that's going to give you long-term gratitude and satisfaction, because you're always going to need to find the next thing every year or every week or whatever it is that gives you that satisfaction. So you might be like, oh, I'll do this because I've got a tax break, and then you'll be like, oh, but I've earned more money this year, so I've just got to give more money to them, right? So you just keep doing it, and actually you're not actually getting it. I mean, the charity's benefiting, you're doing a brilliant thing because you're helping other people, but you're not actually emotionally engaged around the whole process, because
getting out of it what you could potentially get out of it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you're missing. You're calling it perfectly. You're missing out on this huge chunk of other areas that you could get emotionally that would make you feel so much better, and probably give you long-term happiness. Other than, Jesus, I've got we've got £500,000 here that we could write off every year, so we might as well give it to charity, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a different mentality. Neither are wrong. I don't believe neither are wrong, because at the end of the day, you're still helping thousands of other people by doing that action. But just from your own personal perspective, you could just get so much more satisfaction around it if you started to really identify what made you move, what was your purpose, what's your rationale, what's the things that you stand for, because then you can live, as I said at the beginning, you're here for a good time, not for a long time. So you might as well live to the true potential of what you aspire to do.
You've mentioned that a couple of times. You're here for a good time, not a long time, right? You've mentioned this a couple of times. Now, what's transpired over the last sort of 45, 50 minutes is that you seem to have had this this awakening, this kind of, and again, without making it sound wishy-washy,
Yeah.
you seem to have had this thing where there has been this itch, right? There's been this itch your whole life that you've been scratching, and then you've gone, right, hold on, I could have been scratching this and actually getting so much more reward from it than I've ever got before.
Yeah.
And it seems like the evolution of Ollie, the rugby player, and the Ollie who's scratching that itch that inherently you've actually told us you have and had, has now turned into, okay, I can continue to scratch an itch, but I can get so much more out of this. And is that something you've learned? Is that something that just been this shift in mindset? Can you pinpoint a time when that happened? Or
yeah, definitely. That moment, as I say, where she was sat outside opposite my door, is, if you like, I was scratching that itch that was turning into a wound. That's what was happening, and it was now becoming detrimental to my own. To me, it was becoming detrimental to my own life, my own self-worth, my own self-esteem. Like I wasn't getting the enjoyment out of it, because all I was doing was hurting people further down the line. So 100%, I had this moment where I was like, okay, if I keep doing this, it's going to be really short-lived moments of like adulation, these big euphoric highs for a night, a day, a week, but then I'm going to drop off again. I'm going to need to go somewhere else until I changed my wiring, or if you like, I don't know how else to describe it, but how I perceive things and the reason why I do things. If I don't do that, at least I've got time at 32. I wish I'd done it at 22 or earlier, right? But at least I've still got time at 32. I don't want to get to being 72 and, being those people that you see all in life who have pursued this goal of, I don't know, getting endless amounts of money, and they've had all this sort of what we would deem as like success, but they just feel empty inside because they've had 3 divorces, their kids don't talk to them. They've got 17 houses around the world, but they don't go sit in any of them. They don't have any reason.
And I think there's, one of the benefits, I think, for social media and obviously podcasts, right? We're talking about something here very openly that there's going to be a lot of people are going to listen to, and they're going to go, hold on, this guy who's been uber successful, any young lad, young girl right now who's aspiring to be a professional rugby player is going to look at you and go, wow, Ollie's a person that I want to aspire to follow that career path of, right? And they're going to look at that. And then there's also that recognition that with that success doesn't always come the outcome that people perceive there is, right?
Yeah.
Is that there are things that happen. I mean, there's so many people who look at professional, sports people, particularly footballers, right? Because footballers get paid huge amounts of money, right? Ridiculous amounts of money, in fact. And people will look at a retired footballer who's then 2 years after retirement, whether that's enforced by injury or whatever it might be, and they'll look at them and go, this person's harping on about having mental health problems and blah, 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 blah. And there is no empathy towards them because as far as that person's concerned, they've just earned enough money to basically, for multiple generations after them probably to survive, right?
Yeah.
They're going, what have they got to complain about? But ultimately, you've got to remember, right? And I think you've pinpointed that to a T, that with success and with that adoration and with that recognition, whether that's through financial gain, whether that's through people adoring you, whatever it might be, at the end of all that, when that stops, there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And the lift away, that's what that's there for, right? This problem.
Of course, yeah. Well, there's a problem. I mean, there's a problem when you do something that you love anyway, and you can't do it anymore. Of course, right? There's always that fallout. But there's a problem on both sides of the, example that you just gave there, which is the lens that people are looking at. That have I got empathy or not empathy or sympathy for somebody? Right? Is money. They're looking at that medium of what have they got to worry about? They're absolutely loaded.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Well, that's actually sometimes. Well, that's not the right lens to look at it through. And equally, money, just while sometimes it can give you great opportunity, it can also give you massive burden and stress and everything else around it, right? And that's not the lens that I'm talking about here, because if people's definition of success or enjoyment in life is defined by the amount of money that they have in their wallet, they're always going to be unhappy, because at some point in life, like, we are human beings that are driven by emotional engagement and love, affection, those things, there are emotional drivers, right? They're the things that make us feel
Yeah.
great or feel bad or whatever else. That's why, if I have a £50 note in my hand, or if I have £1 million in my hand, it doesn't change anything from an emotional connection, right? I don't get anything. Whereas if Phil puts his arm around me and says, "Mate, you're a top bloke," and I feel amazing, right? There's an emotional connection to that engagement, and I think that's where, what I'm trying to get to is the wiring of people and the rationales that they do things are sometimes not the right ones. And I believe that my ones during my career were not necessarily all the correct ones. Don't get me wrong, I had a brilliant career. I loved it. My experience was amazing. The friends that I made along the way, absolutely phenomenal. But my core driver underneath it all was something that was rotten, if that makes sense. Because at the end of it, it brought me unhappiness. Like when I had to retire and I finally had to let go of this sport, this thing that I'd done for 12 years, I was then totally lost, because it was actually masking this insecurity that I had from the beginning, which was, I need recognition, I need adoration, I need somebody to tell me they love me. And now that wasn't there, that support structure wasn't there, my fall off was even bigger. And I guess my recommendation is, I want people to go and do better than my career, go 20 times more, and get as many caps, play as many tournaments as they can, etc., etc. But just think around, take a moment to pause and reflect on what really gives them fulfillment. And recognize, tune into, Simon Sinek talks about it all the time, but tune into what their why is, like why they're turning up every day, and make sure that it comes from the right reasons. And if it doesn't, that's not a problem. Don't stop, but just start thinking around, reflecting on what's important to you that's going to give you fulfillment and ultimately long lasting happiness. Because
it's almost like future proofing your goals, right?
Of course, yeah.
That you've got to think about what's going to happen after.
Yeah. You must see this in the health and fitness industry the whole time, right? Get all these people that are super geared up and wired up for 3 months, 6 months, 3 weeks, whatever it is, to lose weight, get fit, be sharp, whatever. They do it, they hit their goal, they're finally there. Then they sort of either keep going or relax. Just to go the other way, they relax, they fall off a cliff, and the regression is huge. And actually their depression is even bigger, because they weren't in tune with at the beginning. It was all driven by
doing it right.
Yeah, it was all driven by vanity and need for people to, more women, more men that fancy them, get, I don't know, buy better clothes, whatever the hell it is, rather than the underlying benefits of being super healthy, super, the long-term lasting effects of that. And the outcome is still the same, if that makes sense. But the route to it and the self-fulfillment is very different.
And the drivers change all the time, right? And that kind of brings us nicely onto, the next thing I want to talk to you about, because there are parts, there's a large part of that story I didn't know. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
I
didn't know that about me until 5 years ago.
Yeah. And that was part of the process, right?
You
didn't recognize. And again, same, again, I can relate to that. That's something that I went through as well, where I didn't know what my drivers were. I didn't know what was the rationale behind things. And there's some really interesting ones, which I'm sure at some point when somebody does a podcast with me, I'll tell them about. But that brings me on to Ollie now, right? Because I see you as an adoring husband and an adoring father, somebody who puts his all into that, how did that change your behaviors, habits, mindset, drivers, which we've talked about so many times, right? Drivers, because again, I know that my drivers have shifted massively, and at points, my drivers, I didn't actually know what they were. It was very hard to define what they were. It was just, you were chasing what everybody else was chasing, which was material and, whatever. So
I was the exact same place as you.
So tell me what happened at that point. So again, I don't.
So I did. So I went and sailed around the world. I then went to the North Pole and set this Guinness World Record at the North Pole. And when I came back from the North Pole, I got all the recognitions and plaudits. But that's when the moment had happened with my now ex-girlfriend, but it was in front of my door, like literally 2 days after I came back from North Pole. And I knew at that point something's got to change. So I'd had these sort of if you like, amazing experiences sailing around the world, North Pole, world records. And I was suddenly starting to tune into there's maybe something, maybe it's me rather than somebody else. So I then went on and bear in mind, I was working at PwC at this point as well. So I was going through that process too of like, Jesus, what's my worth here? And I used to be a somebody, I used to be important. I used to have all the experience, used to be the expert. Now I'm not. Now I'm in an environment where everyone else knows 20 times more than me.
Yeah.
And so I went through with Cognacity a 2-year process of therapy, let's call it, right? I mean, whatever, we'll dress it up, whatever you call counseling, but therapy, talking to somebody every week for a good 6 months, and then petered down to sort of every month, of why I was behaving and reacting and feeling the way that I was feeling, what it was rooted into, where it came from, and then understanding my tells, if that makes sense, so that I could become cognizant and aware of these things and therefore control them and become become more appreciative of where I go and how I feel and actually the things that drive and move me.
Yep.
So if you like, I became much more self-aware and had a great understanding of me and what drove me, rather than trying to prove somebody else wrong. Which, you know, I engaged with the purest side of me, of who I wanted to be, the legacy I wanted to leave, what I wanted to stand for, and what I wanted and what I want in life is to be able to have shared experience with the people that I love on this world more than anything in life, and to devote my time and my energy into causes and into people that I have so much respect for, so much time for, so much energy for. That was my sort of purpose in life. And whatever journeys or whatever things that took me on, great, whether that be cycling across America, going up Everest or whatever, my whole sort of lens that I was looking through these charities, you know, if you like, the charity causes, the adventures are still the same thing, but the lens that I was looking at them through was very, very different. They were still all about me, you know, in terms of my drivers, but the drivers were very different. The North Pole and the sailing around the world were driven by, I need to be a somebody, I need to be recognized, I need to this, I need to this.
Yep.
The Everest, the mountains, the cycle across America, the drive a rickshaw across India were driven more by, I want to go and experience an amazing life memory with some amazing people and go and be able to give something back to causes that mean so much to me because they've had an impact in my life, like Alzheimer's Society because my grandmother died from it.
Yeah.
Like the Wooden Spoon because they help disadvantaged disabled children in the UK. And I've got 2 amazing young kids that I'm very fortunate are very fit and healthy, but I appreciate that there are others in the world and in this country that haven't had such good luck. So I want to be able to help them in whatever way I can. And so the lens, you know, that 2 years of therapy or whatever helped me shift my mindset towards that approach. And as a result of that, my wife, Lucy, now, that was part of the process, right? I suddenly understood and recognized what I wanted in life. And I wanted a life partner. I wanted to share it with, have this shared experience with somebody that loved me for me, and I loved them for everything about them. They represented everything that I appreciated and valued in life, and we could raise and have the most incredible family and shared life experience together. Like that was going to be my soulmate that I would do everything together with, rather than some of my adventures that I do it with, you know, some people with who are brilliant from time to time. And now that's why, you know, I mean, I've got my own drivers, my own purpose, but my kids and my wife and my family are, you know, if you like, what make me whole, and that what drive me and what give me value and purpose. And don't get me wrong, I go through the same experiences that everybody do. Some mornings, so I'm like, my fucking kids, like just stop screaming or give me some sleep or whatever else. But I know deep down that they are what give me meaning, if that makes sense, without trying to be too soft around it all. And you know, and that I've never had that experience. Like that's just why I love it now, because throughout my whole life I was searching for that meaning, but I was just looking in the wrong places. Because it's, I don't know, it's, to give you an analogy, right? It's like going to parties with, you say, I want to be super healthy, I want to be this incredible sort of person that lives their life in a healthy environment, and et cetera, and then you go to parties that end in 4 a.m. with a load of drug dealers and a load of pissheads, and you wonder why, oh my God, all I'm doing is taking drugs and and getting drunk all the time, and I'm knackered and I don't do any training and I'm fat and I'm useless, right? I was looking in the wrong places. I was doing the wrong things for what I ultimately deep down believed was fulfillment and success for me. And I was clouded, if you like, from the ages of 10, 11 by this need for recognition from a life event that happened to me that had had a lot more effect on me than I realized.
Yeah.
That shaped me.
But
And
I think there's so many people out there though with that same experience, that same, they have something in their childhood that drives them in a particular way, whether that's a positive or a negative. You know, I think that's a mindset thing, is that there's so many people can look at the negative things that have happened in their life and hardship. And this is something we talk about a lot, is hardship, is that they've taken hardship and they've actually turned it into a positive in some respect. And whether that's because we could go back now and say, well, do you have regrets about that? Do you have regrets that that was your driver? Do you have regrets that that drove you down that path? Because ultimately you are where you are today because of that journey and that almost negativity that resounded from that. Had that negativity not existed, you might never have addressed it and never came to where you are now, right?
Of course, yeah. Well, if exactly 100%. I mean, if that life event hadn't happened, I may never have been so driven and focused to go and have captained my country, right? And be voted as the best player in the world. So, if anything, like, I just have, it's a word that I use loads now, but I just have a load of gratitude for the experience. You can't, it's that classic analogy of like yesterday's history, right? Tomorrow's a mystery, but today's the present. That's why they call it a gift, right?
Yeah.
So, so I try and look at that of like, I can't change these things. And actually they brought me to where I am today. And I'm so grateful for what I am today, the experiences I have today, the family that I have today, the friends that I have today. You know, I'm talking to you. Like, I'm so grateful that my life experience of being driven and being focused and whatever else, and being a rugby player, afforded me the opportunity to meet Phil and Ollie. You know, that was all these things I'm grateful for. It's like everything, right? Could you have got more out of it? Of course, I probably could have, right? Yeah.
Everybody could, right?
There's always, that's the beauty of life, right? That you can always get a little bit more. Like, you can always be that bit stronger, that bit faster, have that much more money, have that many more houses. But the only thing you can't get more of is time. And I'm grateful for the fact that the time that I've spent so far has led me to this place that I am today. And I've still got so much more time ahead of me to now take full advantage of it. Could it have happened earlier? Of course it could have happened earlier. But would I have then had the experiences, met the people, and maybe gone on the journey that I'm so grateful that I went through to understand who I am and what I represent? Maybe not. And so I'm grateful for that. And I love my career. I've got some amazing memories. What an experience, what a ride. And now the future, the thing that's been more exciting is now it only gets better, right? Because you're even more in tune with what matters to you. So whilst that was wicked and that was a great roller coaster, there were a few blemishes and a few issues in it that sort of could have made it better. Now you've got even more control of, you understand it even more, so you can go on and have an even more enriching experience. So
yeah, happiness almost becomes easier, right?
Yeah. You get closer to it, right?
Yeah.
Get closer to it, which is exciting, right? I'm not the finished article by any stretch of imagination, and I don't know all the answers, but I just love that I'm further on than I was 10 years ago.
And I mean, that's, you know, it's intent. It's, you know, and talking about intention versus goals, right? Is that everybody has goals, but your daily intentions are the things that ultimately, you know, result in that happiness, about the people, about the, you know, the experiences and those things that you do on a daily basis, right? Is that, you know, and that time that you're spending with your family or the rugby guys or whoever it was at different stages of your life, right?
Yeah. I mean, mate, and I think the other thing that's amazing is that, you know, I don't mind saying, like, I now finally have peace with my old man as well, right? The lens that I look at that through, like, we would clash enormously, right? Because I come to him and say, like, Dad, I've just been voted the best player in the world, or Dad, I've just sailed around the world, and I was always expecting him to react how I would react, right? I'd expect him to be like, son, that's amazing, brilliant, you're a superstar.
Yeah.
And when he didn't, I'd get pissed off. And then we clash. Like,
and does he know the story?
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
He does.
And part of my therapy was actually not, if you like, not expecting anything in return.
Yeah.
So it's like, so not going with a statement and then expecting a certain reaction. When that reaction didn't come, then getting really pissed off.
Yeah.
Like, because your drivers are then all driven by this need for recognition again, right? It was, now my whole mindset is, I see you, Dad, because I love you, right? I love the fact that you're my dad, and I want to see you, and I love being around you, and I don't actually need anything from you. I don't need you to tell me I'm great. I don't need you to, because I know that's not how you're wired. We're not wired in the same way.
And I think that's a generational thing as well, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that I've looked into? Is that it's a generational thing, and you know, our parents lived a very different life and lived a very different way.
Probably,
of blah blah blah, right? You know,
it's. Would it be the way I react with my kids? No, probably not. But that doesn't mean it's wrong or it's right, right? I mean, that's just my psychology of how I would want to be towards my children, and what gives me fulfillment. You know, I'm sure underneath it all, he probably is super proud. But your point, generational thing, like they can't say it. They
can't say it. It's like no, we don't say those things.
Exactly. So so now
like telling your kids you love them, right? Is it generationally? It was like, no, you don't say that. Not
of course, yeah. Whereas, you know, I think I'd always expected that to be said. Like, to your point, I'd always think, how was my dad? Can you not say that? Like, how can you say that you're not proud? Or like, how can, when I ring you up and tell you I've just been picked for England, how can you say when you're going to go get a proper job? Why can't you just say,
well done, son?
Yeah, well, it wasn't even that. It wasn't even well done. It was just like, when you get a proper job.
When you get a proper job.
Yeah. So, and I always used to expect him to react in the way that I would react and how I was feeling at the time. Well, like, isn't this exciting? And now, if you like, I'm in tune. If I use that analogy or that example, I would be, my approach to that now would be, I am just delighted that I have achieved something that represents me, that I'm all about, right? And I don't care whether you like it or not, Dad. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's not the reason why I talk to you. I don't need you to validate this is a good decision. I just see you because you're my dad. You're one of the people in my life that I love, and you're not going to be here forever. So I just want to appreciate all the things that you know that are great about you. Same with my mum and whatever else. So if you like, I don't need the emotional cues now, which before I just was desperate for. Like, I needed them in order to get fulfillment. I get my own fulfillment now because I understand why I'm doing it.
And you also understand the positives, right? Is that even some of the negatives turned into positives and positives turned into negatives. And again, mindset thing, right?
Yeah. And what, if you like, I quite like it now if he says, you know, even about my job at PwC, I don't know what you do, son. I don't even know what the point of it is, right? But I quite like
it's like
it.
when someone tells you you can't do something, I'm like, thank you for that.
Yeah, but I just quite like it now. I'm like, you know, when he does it, I'm like, oh, there he is. Like, you know, there is there he is again. Like, it's just one of, whereas before I'd be like, you dickhead. Whereas now my approach is like, oh, you know, there he is. You know, that's exactly the type. That's the exact bloke that I know and I love.
Yeah.
You know, for all your faults, you know, I still, you know, I don't know. It's just, I'm so grateful to this Cognacity and the RPA actually for helping me go on that journey, because otherwise, as I said to you, I'm pretty sure I would have been, I definitely wouldn't have been a very happy person. And maybe I would have been one of those stats, you know, in the 40s to 50s of blokes that aren't here anymore. And I'm not trying to say that as a sort of grand, like, disastrous moment, but there is equally other people and other men and women that weren't as lucky as I am.
And don't get that redirection, right?
And don't get that redirection. And that's why, as a community, as a society, particularly during COVID and everything else like that, we need to be supportive and helpful to so many people around us, and actually not look at life or people's reactions through our lens, but try and look at it through their lens, like understand what the hell they're going through, why it's like that, and how we can sort of tune into what's going
context,
on.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you must have that as a coach all the time.
I know that we're gonna have to wrap up. Ollie's a busy man. You've got other calls and things today, but just tell us very quickly about, because you set up Optimist Performance, not Optimize, Optimist Performance. So easy to say Optimize as well. Optimist Performance, about teamwork, leadership, resilience, and change, right?
Yeah.
So you've set this up in order to, again, I'm guessing, to relay your life experiences across and help other people to find that place, right?
Yes. Yeah. 100%. So it's all around what I've coined as like the success psyche, which is what we've been talking around, of like, I believe feelings drive emotions, emotions drive our behaviors, and then our behaviors ultimately determine our decision making. So this whole sort of self-awareness piece. So I try and work with people on an individual one-on-one coaching basis, teams, organizations, around how do you build long-term positive change that involves building high performance cultures, helping people understand and change their behaviors, and ultimately developing strong leadership in your team, your management, or whatever else like that. So I do try and do as much of that as I possibly can through our Optimus Performance. And if people want to know about it, look at the website or drop me a note.
So optimusperformance.com.
Yeah, optimusperformance.com, and
awesome.
all the LinkedIn is Ollie Phillips, or social things at Ollie Phillips 11. So just drop me a note.
Our community will love to hear more from you. I would love to continue this conversation. We could go on for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah,
to be honest, I expected to talk about various things, and we
barely
even
go anywhere
scratched the
near it.
surface.
Yeah, we can do that
we
next time.
barely even scratched the surface. I'm going to scratch the itch for you, Ollie. You're a phenomenal man. Love you dearly. Your mindset is incredible. Your story is incredible. Thank you for sharing it with more than anything, because again, there's stuff there that often people just stick in a bottle, seal a cap, and never ever discuss. And I think that's been part of your journey, is obviously that being open about this.
Yeah.
And obviously talking to your wife and everything about this, and the Ollie that was before, and the journey that you went through to become the Ollie you are now.
Yeah.
I hugely respect you as a person, as a rugby player as well. You're a phenomenal player. Some of the fastest feet I've ever seen.
But mate, you're a great
there's
man.
only one other person that I ever saw with faster feet than you, or potentially faster feet, was you, and he was a linebacker for a major NFL team.
I'd love to have played NFL. What
and
a
he
great
was quick.
sport that is. Yeah, he's quick. But
Phil,
Phil, mate, you're a great man. We've had awesome 10 years already. I commend all the great stuff you do, and the number of people that you help, the lives that you change, right, through the content you produce, the things that you've done. My life is one of those. So, that's why I'm eternally grateful.
Hugely appreciate that. Thank you so much.
We can have another conversation whenever you want.
Yes, we will. I know you've got to jump on another call, but Ollie Phillips, thank you so much for taking the time, and we will speak again soon.
Cheers, matey. Bye, buddy.
Take care. Bye-bye now.